Thank you everyone for coming. We are here for the Jamf Pro MDM Deep Dive panel. I decided to surround myself with a bunch of people much smarter than myself, and I put them all in front of me as protection. But I'm actually here to help protect them and defend them from too hard of questions. But it was kind of asked and thrown out there as an idea of MDM is kind of confusing for some people and how it works and where it goes and all the other fun things that are with it. So I decided to make essentially an all-star crew of people throughout Jamf in many different roles to come here and be able to answer questions on MDM, how it works, how we do it, what we can do around there. It's panel, but this is really just Q&A for you to be able to ask us questions on how things work. So before we get into it all, figure a brief little introduction of who we actually have here. We are joined by Erin McDonald. She is a senior professional services engineer, probably did jump starts and helped many of you get things working all around. Next, we got Stacy Whitman, principal technical support engineer. If your MDM is broken, you probably have worked with Stacy, which probably a few of you probably know her. Legend. Next, we got Matt Anderson, who is one of our architects, solutions architects. It's kind of a broad term, but Matt's been with the company for a while previously as a developer and kind of helps us just build the product to do the different things. Next, we got Ross Drummond, a system engineer from the UK, coming over here to share knowledge and give us accents, so that way we sound a little bit cooler and classier up here. Next, we got Brian Hingles, one of our senior system engineers from one of our development teams who focuses on MDM at Jamf Pro. Next, we have Keaton Savoma, one of our main senior test engineers, so he fixes the things that we break, which is great. We appreciate that. And then next, we have David Surin, who has had many hats. Right now, supervisor of cloud engineering, but he was Jamf's DBA and everything else, and he's kind of one of our main database gurus at the company. He's been passing that responsibility off a little bit more and more these days, but wears many hats as well. I'm Mike Paul. I am a product manager, and I can't answer any of your questions, thankfully, so I'm going to rely on these smart people around me. We do have microphones at the side of both little aisles there if people have questions. Otherwise, I made a bunch of softball questions I could ask them. That way we can get done early and move on to the next more exciting things. No questions? We're good? Sweet. Thank you, guys. This has been a great day. Yes? You can use it, or I can repeat. Your call. It's your party.
Is this thing on?
Yes.
I was hoping you could, first of all, thank you for assembling the panel. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the state of updates via MDM, iOS, macOS, system updates, app updates. Feels a little out of control to me. I don't know if others agree, but I'd love some tips on managing updates, all things.
Who's feeling brave?
I'll start, I guess. So I guess that was a broad question. And I think you're primarily talking about when a new piece of software comes out, you have to deploy it to everything, correct? And that can result in overloading and backups, that kind of thing? Is that?
And we can narrow it down to the OS updates, let's say. So when a new version of iOS comes out, it seems like it's still a little hard to force update that or fully prevent it.
So, hi. So yeah, I guess I'm going to answer your question with a question. We can prevent updates for iOS up to 90 days with MDM. Yep. So you can do that. That'll give you 3 months to stop things getting updated. For Mac, so that's the iOS stuff. I guess what is the thought process of what is the reason why you want to stop updates? Or can you not empower your users to let themselves update? iOS adoption is crazy high. It's like 60% or something like that, usually in the first month of a new release. So folks want emojis. So that's usually the quickest way to get them to update. For macOS, I suppose it's different, right? We can do updates over MDM. We can push the app out via the App Store. We can, there's lots of different things you can do. I guess it's more of a case of what are there blockers there that would stop you upgrading on day of?
I have found a number of times in the past where the OS is ahead of some developers.
Sure.
So if you don't block users from updating the OS, you could find that an
Break
app
stuff.
will
Yep.
not work.
So, I mean, restricted software will help you out there. So prior to working for Jamf, I used to work at Sony Music, and I would let my users download the new version of OS, and then when they try to run it, I'd have restricted software in there that says, hey, we're not ready to let you update yet because we've got some endpoint protection software that isn't compatible. Thankfully, we launched a new one today that would have been compatible. Yeah, so I guess that would be one way to go about it, saying, look, we're not ready yet, but allowing you, having that workflow so that the stress of suddenly pushing out a bunch of updates at once en masse isn't happening if folks are naturally just downloading it, and then you can then send like a notification to your users saying, hey, you can upgrade now, we've tested everything.
The flip side also becomes sometimes it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, that you can actually force new iOS versions to download to mobile devices, but not actually force them to install. Is that still the case?
Yeah, there's the command for it is you can download and allow user to install, or download and restart after install.
Right. So the net result of it, in my scenario, not to be overly narrow, is that I have lots of users on lots of different versions of both iOS and the apps running on iOS. And I'm wondering if there's some tips to streamline that.
Base a little bit on the updating thing. One of the new features we added was updating through the API. We added an endpoint to schedule OS updates for Mac OS and iOS. So you can write some scripts and stuff to target specific versions if that's what you're looking to do. While we added this feature, we did find some issues with the MDM command. Depending on what version you're on, it seems to be getting better each iOS release and macOS release, but there are some bugs on both Jamf and Apple's side that we're trying to work through. So suggest feedback to Apple and to Jamf while you test those scenarios.
This isn't maybe necessarily a technical MDM question, but it seems like the right forum to it. So with user enrollment, what are you recommending or anticipating is going to happen when users already have an application installed? Like if I'm using Microsoft Authenticator for my personal Xbox account, Live account, and then my company also, as part of my BYOD experience in the user enrollment, also wants to push down, a managed copy of Microsoft Authenticator, and obviously there's a conflict there. What do you recommend customers do in that situation?
So the question, just to repeat it for it's on the recording, how to best handle pushing out, if you enroll a device in the new Apple's method of user enrollment, the BYOD method, how do you handle installing commands to install apps if the app has already been installed previously on the user's device?
There we go. I can talk a little bit about kind of more how it works. I'm not sure the ideal workflow myself, honestly, but an important piece to know is that part of the entire justification for the user enrollment feature is that it separates the data, personal and corporate. So one of the tricky things I'm sure some of you encountered is that you can't even know if they do have it installed already. And I think everything we've seen from Apple, like they're pretty explicit, like that's intentional, that's there for the benefit of the user to not expose their personal data, even metadata, to the company. So it is sort of more a policy problem than a technology problem at this point, given that restriction. And I think one of the things that will be useful is self-service. Now that I believe we announced today, like it's officially fully supported, right? So you'll be able to have some messaging through that. You will have at least the ability, if you do scope it automatically install to see whether it succeeded, but you won't necessarily know why. And at that point, it is kind of a communication problem between you and your users. I don't know if anyone else has experience of actual in practice, how that's worked out yet, but that's sort of how kind of the technology itself sees it, is that's a restriction. It's a hard gap, between you and the user data, and then it's kind of on you to figure out the best way to communicate that to your employees or students.
But it will fail though, and it's...
Yeah, if it is scoped, we'll try to install it, but that install will fail.
So I think a good general best practice would be don't push automatically apps to user-enrolled devices and use the inventory to differentiate them. Just to avoid that, we have no means to know if the app's installed.
Yep.
Actually, just what you could do, I think, is like if it isn't self-service, you've got a suite of things that you know folks might already have on their device, that you can put descriptions in self-service. So if they see Authenticator, they'll be like, oh, I don't need to download this, or they might think they need to download it. You can force them to read it before they do download it, so they'd see. You could put, don't download this. This will fail if you try and download this if you already have Authenticator on. That'd be one way.
I have a question. If I have Jamf on-prem and I want to sync to LDAP, but my Jamf lives in the DMZ, and my security guy doesn't want anything in the DMZ to be attached to my Active Directory, how can I do LDAP and get around that?
So the question is, how do I allow my JSS and the DMZ to communicate to an internal LDAP service? Reverse proxy in the DMZ instead of having the JSS there?
That would be the best.
I don't know if we need to turn that off. I think we can keep it on, they'll play it.
That would be the best plan of attack. And I speak way from the depths. That would be your best plan of attack, is to do a reverse proxy, as Mike mentioned, the infrastructure manager, essentially having some sort of tunnel that we can ensure is going to have encrypted traffic back and forth. That's not necessarily going to tick the box that our InfoSec is asking for, saying, well, I don't want anything to communicate back in. True, I'm not necessarily doing that, but I can guarantee that that's going to be over an SSL connection that, unless you are really working hard on being able to intercept that, you're not going to get that. You need to have both the certificates that we're providing on both sides to decrypt that.
Oh, question, I see a hand in the back.
Yeah, what's the best general troubleshooting workflow for troubleshooting MDM that can't come down to the client?
What is the best method to troubleshoot MDM commands that are failing to go down to a client?
I think the first part is just understanding where it's stuck at. So do we have those commands in pending? Have they gotten a push yet? Does the device even know that it needs to check in and pick those commands up? And then once it gets that push, why is it not picking it up? I use sysdiagnose a lot with the managed configuration profiles just to see what's going on the client side as well. Normally the GUI shows me what I need to know on the server side of things.
If you put you can put the server in debug, you'll also get those back and forth messages from MDM. So you'll get the exact XML that the server is sending out, and you'll get spit out exactly what the device is sending when it checks in. So you can actually, using the command ID, actually piece together MDM com from a debug log. That's super useful. Stacy and I do that all the time.
I actually do it a little different. I use the UDID of the device, where you're looking at
That's
the
probably what I meant. I don't know. Yeah.
The command one you can use too, because it is going to be pending in the database, but I normally follow traffic by the device record itself.
And I'll just make a comment to the UDID of the device. Another thing that is different with user enrollment is we and you don't get to see the UDID. There's an enrollment ID value that looks very much like a UDID, and that's what you could use if you're trying to do what they were saying and track a device's traffic through time.
If you weren't familiar with the things Stacy was talking about too, Apple has a KB on a config profile and be able to do sysdiagnos on an iOS device and everything else to get it more verbose logging. It's super handy to have that stuff in your little toolbox. Any other questions? Bueller? Yep.
What do we want to do if there's a command? What do we want to do about commands that are supported by Apple but not Jamf yet? Like the Bootstrap token, for instance.
Thankfully, Bootstrap's coming soon.
Yeah, I was going to say, can we have the product manager talk to this one? Yeah, I will say, yeah, Bootstrap is in progress. I think the biggest thing that I see as far as a new command comes out and we don't immediately support it is not knowing the customer value. So if you can tell that story through, call your Jamf buddy or post it on Jamf Nation as a feature request and explain the story about why it's valuable to you, that'll go a long way towards making sure that's done sooner rather than later.
In regard to the Bootstrap, it was lacking on documentation right away, so we were not quite sure how to do it. I think a lot of people are putting a lot of weight behind it, thinking it's going to do a lot more than it does. It will add value, and we are working on it currently. But yeah. Is there other MDM commands? I mean, I've heard this question, but I haven't heard too many uses of other MDM commands that we're missing or use cases for them. If anybody has those use cases, love to hear it.
The one that comes to mind is, like, we all have a pretty good understanding of how to repair the MDM profile on a machine when you can leverage the binary to do so. You can remove the MDM and re-download it and so on, but we don't necessarily have a good method to do that the other way around. Like, if the framework and binary are broken and you still have the MDM profile, that it's kind of a tough repair there. And there exists an MDM command called install enterprise application, I think. And I think there's even an open feature request for that. And so it's kind of the same question as, like, do you guys have any plans to support restoring the binary onto the device via install enterprise application if there's still an MDM profile? Because you can imagine the scenarios where that's the case.
So currently we do use that to install our binary during the automated device enrollment, but the idea of self-healing via MDM to the binary side has been brought up before.
Okay, so it's been brought up before, but
I'm really getting good at this project management position. I don't know if you saw that answer. It has been brought up before, and the discussion's there, but there's a lot of gotchas and other things that are around there, but it is something that's been brought up that some people are looking at, but that's about all I can.
Does that have to do with limitations on what the binary can do when it's installed through that method?
There's a bunch of limitations around it. I wish it was just an easy fix.
So it's basically splitting the code for the binary to not do a lot of the things it can do today to make that work.
There is an open feature request on that as well. I saw it. I might have even put it under review.
I'm wondering if you guys have a place where you keep configuration profile information that maybe you haven't included yet that Apple has. Do you guys, because I've noticed over the years, maybe they're not feature parity or there's problems with certain aspects
Question is, do we have a list or repository of known configuration profiles that Apple has released in their specs that we have not implemented? And payloads and the whole thing?
Because when you think of Jamf, you think that it should be, you guys have implemented all of the features, right? And that might not be the case.
I guess, no, we don't. And I don't want to sit up here and just list off excuses, I guess, but we hear about new config profiles and new commands the same time everybody else in the world does. Like, we really don't have much advance notice on most of the stuff, so yeah, we just need time to react. But yeah, I think we probably have a list in our backlog of stories for the different teams, like Brian's team. But I don't think we don't make that into a list, yeah, that we post somewhere. But I don't know. I think Mikey could take that as an idea if there's value in that. I think it wouldn't be the craziest thing for us to do because we do go through and diff and look for the things we're missing. We do that, so.
Thankfully, Balms has a nice feature request that has a good list right there that he's calling out and marking them off as we go as well. But yeah, most are captured in backlog tickets, but it's all about prioritization and everything else. I want all the things too. Any other questions? Oh.
So we did run into issues that we basically had on the server already a config profile for macOS, and then one of my administrators used Jamf Migrator to push a profile onto that server that had the same name. So this profile got replaced, and then on the machine we suddenly had two of them. Is this just our fault, or yeah, probably is, but yeah.
Short answer, no. The longer answer, I unfortunately would have to lean on the developer who built Jamf Migrator, which is a great tool, but without any further knowledge, I think I would have to ask him to take a look at what he's doing on the back end of that Swift code. It sounds like, and I could be absolutely wrong here, that we're looking at the name within the API record as opposed to something else, the UUID of the configuration profile to determine the uniqueness. So if it's possible, and I hate to be that person, have you done any sort of issue on that GitHub in regards to that, or reached back out to us to let us know that we made that sort of kerfuffle? Okay, awesome. Okay, I think there might be a way around that. Way back when I was in support, I hung on to a copy of IPCU specifically because I could inject a specific UUID to create a configuration profile. So it'd be just a matter of tricking the device to say, when you check in to determine what profiles you have within scope of you, I'm looking for this specific one. If I remove that profile from scope of any devices, it's going to look when it checks and says, oh, I shouldn't have this profile, and then pull it off.
Sure, I'll ask a question. Why not? What does a blank push do? That magic button that makes you feel better? You just keep clicking? Besides dopamine?
Okay, I'll go first. So yeah, the blank push button is essentially sending a push notification to Apple to tell the device to come talk to the server. And that push is exactly the same as any other push the server generates. That button sort of exists and is useful because you get to trigger that instead of the system, and there's no side effect of another command installed too. Because you could always, try to lock a device, and it would get a push and hopefully kick off communication, but the blank push button does that with basically no other side effects. So it's a way for you to manually trigger a device to come talk to the server, and if there's something for it to do to start doing that, it doesn't itself cause any other action to happen. Fair?
Yeah, it's a little misleading when it's called blank push, because any other push is no more full a push or has more in it. And it's even led Mike Paul astray back here. This was quite a few years ago. But yeah, it kind of gives you the impression that other pushes have some kind of payload, and they don't. The device doesn't know any commands until it reaches back out to the server after it gets the push. And it's just kind of an important thing to note about MDM. Like, there's no payload to a push. There's some data that Apple needs, but there's no command data ever to a push.
Related question, what's the current, standard answer to the question of how long it'll take a device, or what the interval is on a mobile device check-in without a blank push?
Depends how many commands are backed up in your queue and which ones take priority. But we do send the pushes out. It was 100 at a time with a 20-second gap refresh. And then I think it's up to 500 with the 5-minute monitor run, if I remember everything this guy taught me.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. The reason I'm trying to talk here, there's a couple different intervals, and there's also, just to be clear, there's some situations where something will not even wait in that queue, and we'll just send it on the thread that's doing the work, the processing thread that's doing the work already. So it is a complicated answer, but yeah, 100 every 20 seconds is sort of the standard for, the backlog of queues that need to, of commands that need to go.
In the chronological order that those commands were issued, or a random order?
So that depends, like, when did we send it the last push? We're going to try re-pushing that again in 6 hours if the device still hasn't checked in. So it's all dependent on a lot of different variables.
And a blank push would supersede all that?
Yeah, blank push, when you click that button, it goes, before it even responds to the page, it's sent it already.
I believe we have a microphone there.
Yes. Hey guys, how you doing? Question. So, 2 questions. Sorry. And it's real simple. Not anything. When enrolling, and let's just say something simple like losing internet connection, or like, because sometimes for whatever reasons we enroll over MiFi devices, that kind of thing. Lose internet connection in the middle of all of the triggers happening in order. Will the blank push, is that a solution for it to resume where it left off, or just what would you say the best plan of action?
I'll start, I guess. So enrollment is a tricky time, and I guess it depends a little bit on how far it's gotten in the process. And you can kind of think of every communication, it's either the device trying to tell us information, which it does during enrollment, and it waits for us to reply, or every other command is us giving it some information, and it's meant to respond. Generally speaking, if we've given it something to do and it's done it, it'll keep trying to connect back to tell us it did it. So for instance, an application list, if we said we want the application list, and the device drops offline like right then, chances are pretty good it's going to come talk to us again and try to deliver that response. If it dropped offline sort of where we were meant to give it something to do, a blank push would, once it's back online, a blank push would actually sort of reestablish that communication now, that kind of situation would sort of self-heal. Like eventually it would resume communication. And I guess that's assuming it has actually completed enrollment. If it's died in the middle, that's maybe a little trickier to answer. Maybe one of our support friends can talk about experiences with that. But so generally speaking, it should happen eventually. If you want to try to happen now, blank push is a way to try to do that. But there's also other scenarios where that won't.
Now, we were on over support, and we were given some commands in terminal. One of them was to monitor everything. I don't know if, we're very in the early stages of adapting the whole platform, but I don't know if there is a way, or maybe someone does know, if there's a way to monitor everything that happens. The only thing that we've been told is if there's a command for tail.f or .h or whatever one, and you can see all the processes that are happening in order, and that's typically what we do every time when we get to the desktop after the user profile is created. Type in that, shows everything, and then so you can see where it hangs up, and it'll just get stuck on the 5-minute intervals where it checks in and then does nothing. Checks in, does nothing, and like you said, after eventually it will catch up. Is there, I know policy space Jamf or sudo policy Jamf, I think was one in terminal that will, I don't know if you're familiar with that command, but does it do the same thing as a blank push? No.
No, the binary and MDM are completely separate when it comes to computers, so it's two different things talking. iOS is all MDM, so computers can have both.
I'm sorry, I guess I didn't clarify that. I was talking about MacBooks, not iOS. Sorry.
There's a lot more variables during enrollment than when we're talking binary and MDM and a bunch of other things.
So there's a project out there called Jamf Initial Config.
You're saying there's a project out there called Jamf Initial Config to help with the Bootstrap and other stuff. There's also, it's a pretty active Slack channel on the Mac admins room as well.
Great, thanks.
I was curious, I have one machine that I've sent a lock command to. I've sent lock commands to a lot of machines, but one machine it is checking in and it is inventorying, which is separate, but it is not receiving the lock command. Where would you start debugging this?
Does it have the MDM profile?
Yes.
Then assist diagnose?
As far as I can tell, I don't have physical access to it, which is why I want to lock it.
Yeah, that makes it a little harder. That's probably the first thing I would look at is assist diagnose to find out why it's not picking that up. Again, with the managed client profile on it.
Way back when it was possible to build your machines with imaging, another piece that you need to have to lock that is a recovery partition, because I need to be able to do a boot to EFI to lock it to that level. So if we're missing that recovery partition, you can lock it all day long and you're going to have a wide open door.
Our environment deploys user-level certificates to our customers or for our clients for Wi-Fi and VPN access. Can you clarify which macOS accounts qualify for user-level MDMs?
So when you log in to a bound computer, all LDAP users will become MDM capable. For local users, it's typically the first user that logs in. This has changed over the years, and I do know that there's a Jamf Nation article on it that outlines that. If you look for, I think it's user level MDM on Jamf Nation, it should be the first one that pops up, so I don't want to give too much information because it has changed from macOS version, specifically with the local users.
Do you know if that includes users created with Jamf Connect login?
That I don't know. I would assume that the first local user that logs in would be MDM capable, but there's certain triggers depending on how you enroll versus using Jamf Connect and other things that would change that a little bit.
I think that article you mentioned talks about Jamf Connect as well. So I know there's some stuff on, there's some articles about getting that. Yeah, it's the secure token, right? Yeah.
What command or what effect does that command have on user level MDM, on user approved MDM? Does that one have an impact on?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Not from everything that
It's
I
been a
am
long
aware
time
of.
since I ran that command.
Yeah.
There's a
You
lot
and
more
me
things
both.
when you're using binary things to mess with MDM. Is technically a scripted method that might have a greater impact on the user-approved MDM, which is needed for the new PPPC stuff and all the new other fun things coming out from Apple.
Yeah, that command attempts to reset the MDM enrollment payload, but if you have it marked as non-removable, in the case of a DEP install, it tends to fail.
Yes, that command, so you were saying the command fails if the profile is marked as non-removable via your device enrollment program.
Yeah, it would because you have already created a user that's MDM capable. If I recall correctly, the only way to change that when you're locked down is a wipe and re-enroll.
You can send an MDM command to remove the MDM profile if it's non-removable.
And then you get it back down.
You can then have to go back through like profiles nag or other methods. But it's easier than wiping. But yeah, the MDM command to remove MDM does overrule non-removable profiles.
Yeah, I just want to add on top of that, we had a situation with enforcing SS IDs to our computers because we do work in a school environment. And sometimes the policy or the profile was not like working properly, so we put that machine onto just that the profile is going to be excluded because removing that profile just as an individual profile did not work. Is there anything that you can recommend that we should try to do without like fully wiping the machine and then re-enrolling, or we're just, let's say, excluding that machine from the profile and then putting it back in to the job? That makes sense.
Can you run through that one more time?
Yeah, so we have a profile that enforces a machine to auto log into to an SS ID, so it just takes that Wi-Fi address. So sometimes we noticed that a couple of teachers said that it's not working properly, so the only way we were thinking of is removing, with obviously a sudo command, to remove that specific profile from the machine, and then let's say do a Jamf recon again. We had a lot of times an issue that we could not remove just that one profile with a sudo command. Is there anything else that we can probably do, or is there a restriction to base that? Or we were also trying to just put that machine onto an exclusion to that profile, and then just remove that exclusion and put it back in, and just get that profile again, if that makes sense.
Right, but so Matt says root cause, why is this happening to begin with? But the other thing that I can think of is if the Jamf Pro server doesn't know that it has a profile installed, how is it going to get a remove profile command? So if that's the part that's missing, like if you go into the device record and go under profiles and it's not showing up there, but you see it's installed, then we need a recon to pick that up. And then it will get excluded and removed.
But is there a possible way just to remove one profile from the machine even though it is installed? Because I had a look a little bit on Jamf Nation, and we tried a couple of things, and we always got a restriction that you cannot just remove an individual profile from the machine.
The exclusion should do that. Are you scoping the exclusion to the computer record or the user?
Yeah.
Is it a computer or user level profile?
It's a user level profile.
Okay.
So that user would have to log in. That needs to create that active session for that to work. So the login should trigger that removal at that time. I would assume that the command is stuck in pending if it's done properly.
Yep.
Okay, awesome.
So yeah, it may require a log out and a log in, I think.
I think just a policy command will trigger Checkin as well. So it does the same thing, but it has to have an active user session for user level profiles to do anything.
Yeah. Can you help me understand lost mode? Background, we have sent lost mode command to a few iPads. We didn't find them. Then we deleted them out of Jamf. Now we found them again.
So I guess the question is, was the device communicating and picking up the command? Because if it wasn't and it's not on network, it's not going to work.
They are in lost mode, and even if I restore them now, they automatically go back into lost mode.
I personally don't know about that one.
QA, what do you got there?
I have a theory. It might be chicken or the egg sort of scenario. So we're going to pick on me because I am really easy to pick on. I am the person that stole your iPad. I have gone down the block and you've determined that it's gone. You hit lost mode, but during that time, since it's not a cellular device, I'm not on any network that I could possibly join. Stuff happens. I go home. I get busy. Life passes. I forget I have it. You eventually delete the device. I then determine, okay, now I'm actually going to use this ill-gottenly gained device, bring it on to the Wi-Fi. The way that MDM communication and all of APNS works is that eventually, once it comes online, Apple's already pushed a notification to that device to say, check in with this Jamf Pro server, you have to do something. So once it's got that communication and checks and says, oh, lost mode, let's go. And lost mode is a little bit different than some of the other MDM commands. Lost mode, if I remember correctly, and I could be making things up, so put a giant asterisk there. It is a different kind of command that can be stored within Apple's server, so that even beyond the point of that device not having any record to check back in with Jamf, it's still going to have that hook into there. So as soon as it comes online, can see Apple and says, oh, you're lost, I'm locking you down. If I don't have that record in Jamf, I can't then remove that command. So we're in a tough spot. That's a short answer here. Unfortunately,
Apple will take care of it, though. Apple, there's a form you can fill out with Apple if you have devices that are stuck in lost mode. You can prove ownership. They'll do magic for you. Thank you, sir.
so the good news is apparently Apple can save us.
But you have to be able to prove it. Yes.
So question, we manage about 15,000 devices, and we've found that with a lot of our iPads in the education environment, MDM push notifications get stuck, and the only way to get them to start working is send blank pushes. Have you guys run into a better solution to solve that?
So I guess the big thing that I see, especially in education side of things, is we're not cleaning up our Jamf Pro server very well. So you probably could have 5,000 devices that haven't checked in for 30 days. Now you've got all of these pending commands queued up that are fighting for pushes, and it's taking longer for those other ones to go out. So from everything I remember, we send that blank push the first time with whatever command gets generated. If that device is offline, can't communicate, passcode locked for whatever reason, it's not going to complete that command, and we'll then retry again 6 hours later. So it could take some time for that device to pick those up, and just maintaining the servers are the big things that I see.
So what would you recommend they do for maintaining the server?
Making an advanced search to see devices that haven't checked in so many days, finding out why they're not checking in, making sure that your devices are checking in, checking network connections.
Would you do a mass action on those devices for clearing commands?
It depends.
Not?
Like I would need to understand why they're pending, right? I'm just not going to go in and clear all pending and failed, because the minute I do that, they're just going to come back, especially if you have it set up for install auto. So you're not helping anybody in the long run. You might have momentarily when you cleared them all out, but really understanding why those commands are pending and not going out are necessary for figuring that answer out.
Thank you.
Is there a way to see the pending commands?
I mean, at each device record, yes, otherwise a SQL query, yeah.
So in regards to the configuration profiles that he was asking about before, I had run into a similar issue. We had a configuration profile stuck on a bunch of machines that I couldn't manually remove. The single profile was tied to an old Jamf server that we were replacing with a new system. And through all the documentation I was pulling up, there is no way to just pull out one configuration profile manually from the system. You can't just run a sudo command. It's not going to give you the right rights. You have to either rip out all of it completely and then rebuild the system via MDM, or hopefully still communicate from the old server and then schedule it to remove and then reinstall the single configuration profile. But apparently it's just not a very easy process. And even more annoying considering when you have sudo rights, that you still don't have the rights to remove things from a machine is very frustrating. We should be admins. We should be able to do these things. And when we can't, we don't call ourselves users.
I think we can, I mean, there's still the way of doing that where you grab that profile UUID, it's not unencrypt, what's the proper wording? In Apple Configurator, you can throw the profile in there and unsign it. That's the word I'm looking for. Edit that profile UUID, make it the same one that's in the Jamf Pro server from the other one, put it in your server, and if there's no scope, it's going to start removing off of those devices.
Yep. Have it overwritten, yeah.
Yep, so it is a possibility. It's not the easiest thing. It's not the hardest thing, but it's definitely something that can be done.
Yeah, it's not something I'm terribly pissed about. It's just very frustrating when running through that and then kind of feeling like your hands are tied behind your back again. But one other thing I ended up doing is if the system is still in the environment and you can do the rip and replace. If you're not too concerned with it, go in, sudo jamf remove framework, rip out everything, let it rejoin, re-enroll it, push out the policies, clean slate, easy to deal with. And if the system is still inside of Jamf and just re-enrolling on top of what it was previously, it maintains the logs, it already knows what was pushed to the system, and it just continues from there. So it's a quicker way of kind of cleaning it up a little bit. A few more steps, not ideal, but helps get you to a better place.
Yeah, with user-accepted MDM, you'll end up with another step there for the end user. They'll have to accept the MDM profile again. But
yep.
Cool. We're pretty much at time. We're a little bit over. So I guess I'll ask one final question. What's your favorite MDM command? No? All right. Most of us are around all week. I'm definitely here all week, so if you want to come and bug me, and then I can go bug these smarter people, happy to help anytime. Thank you all.